Hello, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining our webinar. Welcome to Think Out Loud. This is our first webinar, and I'm very happy to see everyone joining up. My name is Minno Klarberg, and I work in marketing here at Tink. Today's presenter is Jan van Vonno, our research director. And you will be muted during the session. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to send those via the box on the right side, and we'll go through them at the end. We have 10 minutes saved for questions, and we'll try to get through as many of these as possible. Now, without any further ado, Jan will be discussing some of our most recent opening banking survey results and how attitudes are shifting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Minu. And once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining this webinar from around the world. We planned this webinar as a lunch and learn session, so please make sure you do use that Q&A box on your webinar console. And even if we do not have time to address all of your questions at the end, we will follow up with you to make sure that none of the questions go unanswered. As Minu said, my name is Jan van Vonno, and I work as the research director for Tink. And today I have the opportunity to share with you some of our most recent open banking findings and help you understand why 2020 is the year of value creation. During this webinar, I'll give a brief introduction on open banking, highlight just a couple of the data points from the survey, and then go into some of the real-life examples of how open banking tech is already being used to create value for customers today. Now, before we go into the presentation, first, on behalf of everyone at Tink, I'd like to show my respects to everyone who's on the call and has been impacted by the current corona situation. Whether in health or in business, please know that our hearts go out to you and your loved ones. And despite the fact that many of us are working remotely, we can still get social. So if you want, feel free to share your thoughts, these slides, or any other remarks related to this webinar using the hashtag TinkOutLoud. Now, most of you will probably be familiar with Tink, but just to recap quickly for those who may be less familiar, Tink is an open banking technology provider established in 2012. Today, the company counts just over 270 employees, and we have operations across Western Europe. We're proud to say that we are a licensed account information service provider and payment initiation service provider under the Swedish financial authorities. We are a technology provider to banks, fintechs, and startups, giving these companies the tools they need to build the future of financial services by connecting 2,500 banks. In turn, this allows us to work with some of the largest banks in the world who are all looking of making sense of this industry movement called open banking. Now, for more information on Tink, please go to our website on tink.com. Now, ever since Tink was founded, we've been talking about the shift of an industry, a shift that started roughly 10 years ago, and we predict will continue to be an industry topic for at least 10 more years to come. The shift we are referring to is a shift of an old model where relationships were one-to-one between financial institutions and its customers, where the service provider controlled the data and owned the infrastructure. We're shifting to a new model where the democratization of data will improve services, increase personalization, and allow customers to get access to the best services via digital channels, even if they're outside the realms of financial services. Now, the shift we're talking about is a shift we call open banking. And we're not talking about the UK legislation for open data standards. We're talking about the exchange of data between financial institutions and third-party providers, or TPPs, to deliver enhanced capabilities and experiences to the market. Open banking is only part of the equation. Banks are moving from an old model with old systems to a fully digitalized platform. That's a quote by Christian Clausen, an executive advisor for Tink, a board member at BlackRock, former CEO at Nordea, and former president of the European Banking Federation. Christian is one of those bank superstars that is often talking about the transformation of business models for banks. And he's referring to this notion of platformication. In the context of open banking and platformication, I often like to explain that there are two very generic strategies that financial institutions can embrace. On the one hand, some financial institutions are putting the emphasis on producing APIs, whether for the sake of compliance or for the sake of business model transformation. They're all transforming a business model and operating model targeted at the developer audience. On the other hand, there are also those who are putting the emphasis on consuming APIs in order to deliver those enhanced experiences to the market and focus on short-term goals. Now, last year, we dubbed 2019 as the year of open banking. Although open banking has been around for over a decade, it wasn't until PSD2 was enforced that it started to pick up momentum. 2019 was the year of open banking because the entire European industry needed to prepare for the final stages of the directive. The RTS, or in other words, the regulatory technical standards for strong customer authentication and common and secure open standards of communication, it's a mouthful, went into force on the 14th of September 2019. Now, PSD2 and the RTS are important for open banking for so many different reasons. Not least is the reason that PSD2 acknowledges that open banking services have existed for many years, and it is giving the providers of these services the opportunity to be properly licensed under the relevant financial authorities. Another reason why PSD2 and the RTS are important is that it has invited banks to create and provide access interfaces, whether through a modified customer interface or a dedicated interface such as an API. These interfaces would give these newly licensed companies, these open banking service providers, an opportunity to access customer data in a transparent way. Now, if 2019 was a year of open banking, 2020 is going to be the year of value creation. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it's one of the main conclusions from our forthcoming report on open banking attitudes. So every year, Tink conducts a survey among nearly 300 financial executives across Europe in order to better understand the attitudes and perceptions towards open banking. This year, we also looked at the investment strategies, but we'll go into that during our next webinar. Let's first look at some of the attitudes and how it has shifted since last year. Last year, we asked respondents to indicate whether they were negative, neutral, or positive towards the open banking movement. At the time, we found that 55% of bank executives were positive towards open banking. And considering some of the controversies in relation to PSD2 and the short notice of the September 14 deadline, the positive response at the time was a surprise to us for some of us at Tink. However, as open banking started to appear as a more prominent agenda item, executives have had the opportunity to explore how open banking will start adding value to their operations. This is reflected in the fact that this year, the number of respondents positive towards the movement has increased to 61%. But the attitude towards open banking is merely a proxy for where the mindshare is. What we really want to know are what the drivers are for investments, and if these financial institutions have created a clear strategy for their execution roadmap. So what we see here are the most important drivers for open banking investments. And what we see is hitting the top of the list is improving the customer experience. This is followed by IT modernization as well as process optimization. Compared to last year, we're glad to see that customer experience, CX, hits the top of the list again. But we're also seeing that the investments in open banking are recognized as an opportunity for financial institutions to increase return on equity and improve operating margins. Looking at the list, you might be surprised to find business model transformation ranked at the bottom. Going back to the quote by Christian Clausen, in the move towards platformification, open banking is going to play a role, but it's not the full story. I mean, still, a quarter of the respondents, 24%, indicate that business model transformation is an important investment driver for their organization. The attitude and drivers of open banking investments in open banking, or they don't give you really far unless there's a strong alignment within the organization between the opportunities and the strategy for the business. We wanted to better understand whether financial executives believe whether this was the case or not. And on the left chart here, what you see are the percentage of respondents that indicated that open banking is seen as an opportunity internally. And on the right chart, what you see are the percentage of respondents that indicated that their organization has communicated a clear strategy for open banking. Straight off the bat, you might notice that on average, just under 60% of respondents agreed with these statements, which means that just over 40% indicate that open banking is not seen as an opportunity internally, nor has there been a clear strategy communicated. The results show that there's an opportunity for many organizations to improve alignment internally. But especially when you look into some of the countries, you might notice that here on the left, that 77% of the French respondents indicated that open banking, that the opportunities are recognized internally, but only 55% of respondents believe that there's a clear strategy. Compare that to the UK and Spain, for instance. Both countries score high on both questions, indicating high alignment internally. Or compare that to some of the lower countries, where we find some of the Nordic countries, such as Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and also Germany. Reasons why we find these countries ranked low could be because the notion of open banking is already considered part of daily operations and not something considered a topic requiring separate communication or strategy. We know, for instance, that banks such as OP in Finland, Danske Bank, and many of our own customers here in Sweden, like Nordea and SEB and SBAB, they're all making significant investments in open banking in order to improve the customer experience. Germany, however, is an interesting one. Germany is home to some of the pioneers of open banking. But in response to PSD2, we know that many German financial institutions have found themselves in a difficult situation where it wasn't clear to them what was expected and to what extent open banking will allow them to innovate for their customers. And that brings us to some of the main challenges for open banking. I bet no one would be surprised to find that legacy IT is what's considered the top inhibitor for open banking investments. But we also find that a lack of urgency or more important business priorities, as well as regulatory restrictions, are also important challenges. I imagine this being the case in particular for some of the German respondents. What you might also notice is that the two lowest ranking challenges in this list. Clearly, there's no lack of understanding of open banking, nor is there a lack of buy-in from senior leadership. And the lack of buy-in, it's typically one of the main challenges for technology investments. Now, one of the ways how financial institutions are overcoming some of these obstacles is by forming fintech partnerships, technology partnerships with fintechs. And when we asked the respondents how many of them have formed partnerships in order to gain access to open banking technology, only 22 admitted to have such a partnership. However, what's interesting is that the vast majority of these companies have established partnerships with more than one fintech. In fact, nearly a quarter of them indicated to have more than 5 fintech partnerships for the execution of their open banking objectives. And more, 69% of the respondents indicated that they've increased the number of partnerships since last year. Not a single one of them said that they've discontinued any of their partnerships in open banking. Now, looking into the future, what we see is that respondents indicate that they do have plans to form open banking partnerships. In fact, only 22% say that they have no plans, and the vast majority are looking to establish plans within the next 6 months. Now, there are many different types of fintech partnerships. Some partnerships help produce APIs, some help manage APIs. Some fintech partnerships act as sales or communication channels, while others provide technology services in order to execute the bank as a platform or the platformication objectives. But there are very few fintechs that are able to operate as an account information service provider or payment initiation service provider on behalf of a financial institution. This makes open banking fintechs partnerships extremely strategic, and it helps bank executives with their short-term objectives. In fact, when we look at a couple examples in the market, I haven't actually seen or haven't been able to find many use cases that does not involve at least one fintech partnership or partnership in any shape or form. So what I want to do with you over the remaining couple minutes is I want to talk to you about some of the use cases and some of the real life examples in open banking. It's important to understand that open banking has many different applications. I remember last year, some people or most people couldn't think past the personal finance management or PFM or the multi-banking use case. But with a little imagination, we can come up with relevant and impactful use cases for every stage of the customer journey, from acquisition and onboarding all the way to servicing and even retiring customers if needed. So I want to talk you through 4 real-life examples of open banking. Some of these use cases may be new to you, other you might be familiar with, but let me say in advance that this is just a tip of the iceberg, and if you want to know more, feel free to connect with me after the webinar. So let's start with one of my favorite use cases, and I love it because it's so simple. Monk is a fast-growing Swedish fintech that is redesigning the core banking platform by using artificial intelligence to provide personalized financing solutions. Now, Monk is using open banking tech at one of the earliest stages of the onboarding process, the registration. It is using open banking to fetch the IBAN details, allowing customers to complete the registration process without needing to go out of their own ways in order to enter their IBAN details, grab their bank card and try to copy it and make mistakes in the process. This is improving the digital customer experience. It is accelerating the onboarding process by automating steps of the journey, and it increases conversion by reducing the number of errors during the entire acquisition phase. It's so simple, yet so effective. A better known use case for open banking is, of course, credit scoring and risk analysis. And I personally like to use Credits as an example that is really taking this to the next level. Now, Credits is a company that does credit analysis based on user contributed data. And what this means is that Credits invites its customers to share their financial information using open banking integrations, and then it gives the user control over exactly what information is shared. And in turn, in contrast to most other credit scoring tools, Credits is now granted permission to run an analysis on accurate and the most current and up-to-date information available. In doing so, it is automating the first steps of that customer journey. And what I love most about the use case is that it's about the user. As you can see in this example, the user, Mike Jones, gets instant feedback on his financial situation. In this case, his score is a 6.5, which is a very good, very healthy credit score. Now, another open banking use case is a company called Njorda. What they're doing is they're taking open banking one step further. Njorda is a startup that created an app that lets everyday investors gather their savings in one place, but it is less about micromanaging everyday spending and more about maximizing the bigger picture. Daniel Roos, Njorda CEO, said that they don't care as much, they don't care about what, how much coffee people are buying. They care about their investments and how their investments and pensions are performing. The first thing Njorda is doing with open banking technology is aggregating data that sits outside the realm of PSD2. So Njorda analyzes the user's investment portfolio, shows the investor's exposure to different markets and risk levels, and then provides personal advice and investment recommendations based on the investor's risk tolerance and profile. This is improving engagement rates, it is increasing customer investments, and as a result, improving the customer risk profile as well. And finally, one of the oldest banks in Europe, Caixa General de Deposito, they launched their I guess the first true open banking application in Portugal last year. So CGD launched a brand independent and bank agnostic platform called The Box. It is targeted at anyone with a Portuguese bank account, allowing them to manage their finances from a single application. And we're not just talking about aggregation, we're talking about full control here, including the ability for the nearly 50,000 active users to transfer funds from one bank to the other bank without leaving the application. Now, what I love about this use case is that it's not just a product from some fintech from Lisbon. It's a bank that's 150 years old, looking to innovate and improve the customer experience, and in turn, increase revenue by creating a marketplace where it can make recommendations for financial as well as non-financial services. So, in conclusion, it's important to understand that open banking is not just about compliance or transforming business models. You have the opportunity to leverage open banking to enhance your current business models. And we've seen that many executives in Europe are experiencing challenges with communicating a clear open banking strategy internally. So what I would recommend is by making the business strategy central to open banking investments, it helps increase alignment, especially for those investments that relate to the customer experience. And finally, most, if not all, of the open banking use cases are being created using one or more fintech partnership. In our survey, we found that nearly 70% of the financial institutions without a partnership said that they're looking to establish one over the next 12 months. And it is all to create customer value immediately. Now, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Note that more information on the survey and some of our forthcoming reports will be published on tink.com/resources. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter to stay up to date. Also, if you want to get in touch, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or contact us at partnerships@tink.com. With that, I'm just going to hand it over back to Minu to see if we got any questions from the participants on the call.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. And again, thank you for all of you who attended and asked us questions. We got a few of them, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. We will send you a follow-up email within next week containing a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as a link to the full report that is made available on April 22nd. And if you're interested in our previous reports, you can find those on openbanking.tink.com. And now for the questions. We got a few ones about traditional banking and their challenges in the current shift. One of the more important ones were, what are the challenges for traditional bank to develop an API?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Minu. What are the challenges for traditional banks to develop an API? Well, unfortunately, this is not something we addressed during the survey, but it is important to understand that the efforts in creating APIs are fueled by a number of different drivers: internal modernization, internal IT modernization, compliance, and of course, the topic I referred to earlier, the business model transformation sort of objective is more long-term strategy. But when it comes to publishing open APIs, PC2 APIs, and premium APIs, the departments responsible for this are not just serving internal customers. They're serving a developer audience, a new audience, a developer audience. And in order to make this a success, I think banks need to understand that these developers expect support, well-written documentation, and they need to align with service level agreements because developers are expected to build applications using those APIs. And this means that the operating model for a bank, that for the banks that are aspiring to produce APIs, this operating model needs an overhaul. What's interesting, Nordea published an interesting blog last year where they basically disclosed that they've developed a B2D strategy, a business to developer strategy. The change management in relation to this is what I imagine and hear are probably one of the most important challenges in producing and developing APIs. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a perspective in where the challenges would be for banks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for elaborating. And staying within the traditional bank area, we have another question for one of our participants, wondering if open banking requires traditional banks to move their businesses into the cloud.
So whether cloud is required for open banking? So
Yeah.
I believe so. It's an interesting question. Straightforward, no, it does not. And I guess I might need to ask what the business, the bank business is in this question. But many financial institutions continue to successfully operate on traditional mainframe systems. Although it is, I mean, I can imagine it being a huge burden from a maintenance perspective. It's keeping the lights on. So however, I don't think there's a single CIO, like a chief information officer, in the world that does not recognize the benefits of cloud computing with virtualized infrastructure, the containerization of applications, the usage of microservices. Cloud computing is the new paradigm. And it's proven to be equally, if not even more secure than traditional systems deployed among many financial services companies today. So when it comes to open banking technology, I mean, the technology itself can be deployed anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the cloud, but for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, it does make the most sense. But I guess it really depends on the company. So the answer is no, but there are many benefits to cloud computing.
Okay, thank you. And for the final question, what are the risks and limitations for banks to share a common platform with fintechs?
That's a great question, actually. The risk and limitations for banks to share a common platform with a fintech. So we recently published a blog on trust a couple weeks ago, explaining that trust comes forth from four things. We said regulations, competence, security, and integrity. And I think every bank needs to do its own due diligence and assess for themselves whether a fintech and sharing a platform with a fintech is going to meet their required standards from a support and security perspective. Many fintechs that are helping the incumbents, are maybe at different stages in their maturity journey. But I think it's important to understand that, as fintechs grow up, they need to mature as an organization, and they need to be able to meet the very stringent requirements from the bank side. So I would recommend banks to assess their fintech partners like they would do any other technology vendor, especially when it comes to the processing of customer information. I guess in essence, it comes down to doing great due diligence.
Okay, that was the last question for today. That's all the time we had today as well. If we didn't have time to go through your question, or if you would like to speak to Jan directly, you can see his contact information here on the screen, and you can reach out to partnerships@tink.com for any general question. And thank you again for attending.